the Glazunov and the way that we play it is so different than the way it's normally played that Al Regney, who's actually the on-call saxophonist for the New York Phil and has been for 30 years, I think. We were talking, and he says, you should do your own edition of the piece. And I said, well, that would be great, except I didn't change a note. It's just that it sounds so different from the way people normally play it that there's this assumption that we made all these cuts and all these edits, and it's exactly the way it was written. The only difference is that we chose to ignore the metronome markings because it's such a beautiful line, and when you race through it, I think it loses impact for me. And I relied on Andrei's extensive understanding of Russian music and Russian melodies and what they represent emotionally. So the whole idea is to play these melodies and have, in each section, when there's little changes, it represents a different emotion. And he tells the story of Glazunov and how he's this proud Russian composer, and because of political situations decides to leave with his friends. Glazunov gets to Paris, and they say, well, that's very good, but we already have a Russian composer, speaking of genres, and it's Stravinsky, so we don't need another one. You know, your musical merits don't matter. It's where you come from that matters, evidently. So he struggled as a composer, and the reason he wrote the piece was not out of love for the saxophone, but the saxophone was a new instrument, and if he could throw his hat in the ring, maybe his piece could get played. So when Andre talks about it, he says there's the beginning melody, da 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 dee da. It's a very Russian melody, and the reason that you hear the piece, the melody stated so many times in the piece, is that this is the melody that represents homesickness and a longing to be back in Russia, which is interesting when you read up on all of these Russian composers. It's amazing. They all wanted to go back home. Doesn't matter who they were. With the exception of Stravinsky, he was cut from a different cloth, but most of them longed to go back to Russia. So that's the way I started thinking about the piece. Every time I heard that melody, it has to be somber, it has to be slower, it has to be, and then you get to the happy parts, and there's all these things that the music changes. It's because it has so much information in the piece. And if you just play it with a straight beat, it loses its potency. It's a beautifully melodic piece. There's all this beauty that you can dig out of the melody, and we've played it together 5 times. And each time we're committed to digging more and more information out of the piece. And it's been a marvelous experience for me.